Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of Kaiju Conversation. I'm your host, Elijah, and today we are doing the second ever Kaiju Roundtable discussion. Now, is it a Kaiju Roundtable discussion? Is it a Tokusatsu Roundtable discussion? Is it a Kaijin Roundtable discussion? Or is it a giant monster roundtable discussion? All of these questions will be answered as I am joined by some lovely gentlemen from the Kaiju Conversation Discord. We've got Juan. How are you today, Juan?
I am quite well. Doing good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. We have the lovely Geek Rage.
Hello.
He's very calm, cool, and collective. Get ready. He's going to be screaming in a few minutes.
That was pathetic.
Hey, Rage is in my name for a reason.
And we have the wonderful William.
Hello, everyone.
And today's discussion will be what is a kaiju? What is tokusatsu? And with this, we'll also be establishing yokai, kaijin, seijin, and henshin. So, a lot of stuff to talk about today. So we might as well get into the podcast. But before we do, I'd like everybody going down in the order I introduced everyone in. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are, and yeah. So we're gonna start with Juan, and then we'll go to Geek, and we'll wrap up on William, and then we'll hop right in.
All right. My name is Juan. I've recently joined a server. I've been trying to get a little bit more into kaiju and tokusatsu related, mostly Japanese based. I was introduced by Godzilla, grown up with Godzilla, and well, I'm here now, and I've been learning a bit more. I've been getting into stuff like Ultraman and all those things. That's all I can really say. I'm a kaiju artist. I do very surreal type of artwork or whatever, but yeah, it's nice to join this podcast. First podcast I actually ever been on.
Nice. And then Geek.
I'm Geek Rage 1337. I've been in the Discord for a little bit. I've been into kaiju since I was a little child. I've been at this for a little bit. And I have a YouTube channel by the same name that I really need to give more attention to.
And then William.
Hello, my name is William. Kind of like Juan here, I too am a kaiju artist. However, I am fairly new to it, so I don't have much work done so far. But for those that are interested, I have a DeviantArt account under the name Maturian for those that are interested. Godzilla, of course, was my introduction to kaiju and the tokusatsu genre in general, but as of recently, I've really gotten into the Gamera trilogy from the Heisei era, and I've also been thinking of dabbling back into Ultraman, as I did once watch the original series when I was a child.
All right.
Alrighty. So, starting us off here, I think we should discuss what everything will probably fall under, or possibly not. Tokusatsu. Do we all know what tokusatsu is?
Tokusatsu to me is anything to do with practical effects. That's under its definition. Mostly practical effects. Not CGI, just, again, any practical effects. But I like to define it by Japanese or American, just like say, like most of the time people understand when you say tokusatsu, they'll think, oh, you're talking about Japanese. Because if you try to say American, they wouldn't quite understand it. They wouldn't really understand the conversation too well, so it's just best to keep it regarded for whatever it's called from whatever region.
I see. Geek?
Do you want the more practical definition, or do you want my personal definition?
What does tokusatsu mean to you? We're starting off like that, I think.
All right. Well, tokusatsu for me is basically it's a very certain style of filmmaking that is usually very similar to what Tsuburaya did back in the Showa era. Usually with suits, miniature buildings, for its sci-fi storytelling. Though this even means that even things that aren't Japanese, like let's say Young Gary, that would still count as tokusatsu. Even though it's not Japanese, it's Korean. So to me, it's a filming style that normally uses filmation that was made popular by Tsuburaya back in the Showa era. That's what tokusatsu means to me, or how I would identify it.
Okay. And then William?
Well, for my definition, it's sort of broad, but tokusatsu, at least to me, is a genre of either film or TV in which it's mainly comes from the Western world, like China and Japan, but it's not necessarily limited to those areas where it requires heavy usage of special practical effects with maybe some assistance of special effects, such, for example, maybe the occasional beam or source of light. But it can also transcend multiple. But despite the fact it has a very distinct style to it, it can go across multiple genres like horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and such. But of course, the main common thread being the uses of suitmation, models, miniatures, and such.
All right. So I think it's safe to say that we all define tokusatsu as a genre. Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd agree. It's a genre.
Okay. So we've established that tokusatsu is a genre. Now, one thing I heard frequently was mainly practical effects. Now, let me ask you guys this question. Would that mean you don't count Shin Godzilla as a tokusatsu film? Or Jellyfish Eyes?
Well, in the case of Shin Godzilla, it's, well, for the actual movement and design of the suit of the character itself, well, Hideaki Anno actually specifically designed Shin Godzilla to have a very distinct texture to his skin to make it look like he could have been made out of a rubber suit. And not to mention the fact that there is one shot in which Godzilla's second form is smashing through some buildings where they actually did use like a prop, and well, it was like a stand-in prop with some miniature buildings. And although it went unused in the movie, they did build an animatronic for Shin Godzilla.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say with Shin Godzilla, it does use CGI heavily, but the way that it's filmed, the way that the monster is designed, and there is actual props to it. They even use like a mocaption suit for the monster itself, but they also hooked it up to where the actor would have to move like a Godzilla suit. I would say that it's definitely more. It falls under that tokusatsu genre.
Not to mention, to add to the fact that not only was it motion captured, but the actual actor that played the motion capture for Shin Godzilla actually asked to have a wooden mask that resembled Shin Godzilla's face to get more into the character.
Okay. Geek, do you have anything you would like to add?
I can't talk about Jellyfish Eyes, but Shin Godzilla, I think, despite it being CGI, follows a lot of the other criterias that, again, the special effects that were used, like, again, Tsuburaya's techniques were used in the filming of Shin Godzilla. And if you use those techniques, even in a CGI or even if like it was a video game, like a 3D Realm or something, like tile thing, where all of it was CGI. If you're using Tsuburaya's techniques in most of your film, I would count that as a tokusatsu film, such as his filming techniques of camera work, his techniques of, again, how do the creatures look? Like, do they look humanoid in design, if you will? Do they move with weight, like someone's in a suit or whatever? Shin Godzilla does that. Now, I can't talk about Jellyfish Eyes because I have not seen it.
Okay. So let me give you guys some context for Jellyfish Eyes. It has kaiju, or it has monsters. We'll establish what a kaiju is later on. It has monsters. There are monsters in the movie. However, all but one of the monsters is CGI. And CGI is used throughout the entire film. They replaced all of the practical with CGI. Would that count as tokusatsu? Or would it not be tokusatsu?
Does it use the film elements that were popularized by Tsuburaya back in the Showa era?
When you say that, there's a few things. Are you referring to matte paintings? Are you referring to suits, animatronics, puppets? When you say what Tsuburaya used, which part are you referring to exactly?
Mostly the style, like kind of like you said, sort of like all of that. But there's a certain feeling you get when you watch, the old Showa Godzilla films, or even those that were inspired by him, such as Gamera, Ultraman. There's certain feel you get when you watch tokusatsu that's different from if you watch even something similar that never took notes from him. Like, for example, one could argue that because of the practical suit effect that is in the original Alien, one could argue that's tokusatsu. But if you watch Ultraman and then you go into Alien, the filming's different. The backgrounds are different. The way the suit and how it moves doesn't move like a Tsuburaya production. So I wouldn't call it tokusatsu. That's kind of what I mean is when you look at that stuff, does it have the same effect of feeling you get when you would watch something like that? Where you're like, yep, this is in the same genre. This feels tokusatsu.
I don't feel Showa era from Jellyfish Eyes, and I would say the same for stuff like Ring. I don't get those Tsuburaya feelings from Ring or like the Bloodthirsty trilogy or House.
All right.
And those House and the Bloodthirsty trilogy, all those came out during the Showa era. So,
I mean, from sounds of it, like, to me, I find tokusatsu is very hard to really pinpoint. Because really, in general, it just means practical effects. But how I define it is, I'd say Geek's way of defining it is pretty close to how I define tokusatsu. Like that.
okay.
So, yeah, that's my view on it. And say something like Jellyfish Eyes or Ring, it doesn't have that tokusatsu feeling despite being practical effects. I wouldn't put it under tokusatsu because I believe it would create confusion of what really, when you talk about tokusatsu, what we talk about as tokusatsu, it causes confusion.
I do want to say I do know the actual definition of tokusatsu is special effects, but I am talking about what tokusatsu means to me. So technically, under the definition, similar to how Ring would be tokusatsu, the original Alien would be tokusatsu in that effect. I do know that definition, but the question was asked of, what does tokusatsu mean to me when I think of it as a genre? And that's what I'm saying.
All right.
I don't want that confusion out there.
Yeah.
So my question to you, one, and if anybody else would like to pitch into this, go for it. So what would you consider jellyfish eyes or ring if they're not tokusatsu?
Um, if they're not, I would say that, especially like Ring, that to me, I would put under horror or J horror is how I would associate those because they sound more of a. I don't know much about Jellyfish Eyes, but I know Ring is definitely more of a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
But that could
Jellyfish
be
eyes is
associated
a.
like with
I was just gonna say Jellyfish Eyes is a kids movie.
ah.
So it's the opposite of horror.
Okay, so I guess that could just fall under general practical effects, like
Well, it's CGI.
yeah, it's it's CGI. Oh, I'm stupid. Okay, then that's not practical effects. It's just CGI. I don't know how I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know how to put it into a genre. But Ring, I know. Ring, I feel as it's under J horror or the Tokusatsu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would kind of feel the same way. And in fact, it's kind of funny you use Ring because Ring is what I would use as the golden standard of style for J horror. So if you want to put something that could use practical or CGI for its storytelling, but instead of it being filmed like a Subaraya production or Ultra Q episode, it's instead filmed a little bit more horror orientated. I would definitely put it more under the J horror genre that I believe Ring actually started. I think Ring it was
Actually,
the actually okay, go ahead.
I was actually gonna say let's go with what you were saying there.
Mm-hmm.
So if tokusatsu is a genre, would we agree that J horror is a genre as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Just
Sure.
yes. Okay. Now, Geek, you said that Ring is kind of like the standard for what J horror is, and you are accurate. It's what really started the term J horror. But there were horror films in Japan before Ring. As an example, Gojira and really all the Godzilla films are considered Japanese horror films.
Uh,
I think the most famous of the early horror films is House. I don't know if anybody has seen much J horror, but House is very different from Ring. Um, Most horror films before Ring are very different from Ring. Stuff like House and Kawaii are very art housey, vibrant with colors and whatnot. And then you've got stuff like the Creature features or the Bloodthirsty trilogy, which are vampire films, and like Wolf Guy, which is a werewolf movie, but it's also a kung fu film. So, what would classify as J horror? Would those not be considered J horror then?
If we're talking in terms of Godzilla, mostly in maybe more of like 54 or Shin, but I really wouldn't put or label the other Godzilla movies as J horror, just because there's not a feeling of fear you really feel as an audience member. It's more of a feeling of what's the word? Maybe suspense at most,
right.
but not really like. No, I guess you could say like if you're not scared of something that's in J horror, you could say, oh, that's not scary, so I guess it's not J horror. But I mean, like you watch like 54 or Shin or Ring, you can tell that's meant to kind of really go deep into your mind and horrify you of what you're seeing on screen, just like the characters are. I don't really get
Well,
that feeling from other Godzilla films that often.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
I think the reason because of that is the fact that because you still have to take into the historical context behind the original Gojira. Like, keep in
Yep.
mind, Gojira was released like a little bit less than a decade after Hiroshima and Nagasaki were attacked. So to show an audience a movie that is showing a physical, or I guess a monster representing such a terrifying Holocaust, that it would affect that audience so much more because of the fact that it was a real event that happened recently. But of course, now that we're like way over 70 years later after the event, I guess you could say the aura that the original film gave off is now, I guess you could say, faded because of the fact that that event is so far from us now that it really couldn't give the same kick that it would have back in the day.
To say with 54, what I like to say about it is that I feel it could definitely be more under a horror genre, just because not only the fact that it is a black and white film, but that's not the only reason. It's the atmosphere that 54 has and then the message behind it. But that atmosphere and a lot of the shots that 54 has can be very terrifying and very unnerving compared to a lot of Godzilla films, even more so than Shin. Shin was great, but nowhere near the atmosphere 54 had when it comes to pure horror and pure shock. There's something eerie about it where I could put it under horror.
Yeah, just to add on to that, you also need to remember about inspirations for 54 as well. I believe, I want to say a year, we had the Lucky Dragon incident also happened. Well,
about 7 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 7 months, yeah, where we had the Lucky Dragon incident as well. That also like went into the creation to help create 54.
Yeah,
and you are also right on atmosphere.
And that's
as
where
well.
the inspiration for the beginning scene came from. The scene where we see the Fisher boat and Godzilla emerging, that was supposed to be a reenactment of said event on the Lucky Dragon.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So 54 is a situational horror film, is kind of what I'm getting at.
You could still classify it as a horror film, and there are still scenes in the film that even to this day I would definitely say are disturbing. But again, it was probably at its absolute scariest when it was first released.
Mm-hmm.
Well, simply because of the fact that it was depicting a disaster that the world had, well, at least Japan anyway, was still recovering from.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, 54 itself, the suit design is actually designed not only after a Tyrannosaur and Stegosaur, it's actually designed after the victims of radioactive poisoning and burns, which is why he has the tree bark-like skin and all
Exactly.
the tumors on him.
The texture of the suit was made to invoke keloid scars, and actually during the early stages of the monster's design, Godzilla was originally supposed to have a mushroom cloud-shaped head.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is the agreement is 54 is horror, Shin is horror, but none of the rest are, correct?
I don't know. Hedorah, I think, could be underneath psychedelic horror.
Would you label it under the genre of maybe J horror though?
Yeah, I think I would. There is some very disturbing things in that film. Some very disturbing psychological things with that film. Like when he was in I think it was a bar, whatever the character was in, and then all the heads like started turning into fish. Everyone started turning into like fish, and I don't know what was going on in that film, but it was disturbing. Especially when Hedorah like goes over things and you see like you drenched in whatever the pollution Hedorah is, or you see skeletons, and I could put that under horror as well.
I see.
It's not just limited to the show era. I would say like a few films in the Heisei series would actually somewhat delve into horror. More specifically, Biolante, I would say definitely can fall under a horror category.
Destroya.
Okay.
Yep, Destroya too. They both have scenes where the title monsters are directly attacking the humans. And Destroya especially, because like it really gives off I would say almost an alien vibe, like as in Ripley Scott's Alien.
Yeah, it definitely gives that very alien-like vibe when the destroyer crabs are crawling around, they're killing people off, they're hiding in vents or outside, and it really diverged from the main
Plus there's the
themes of the
scene where like
film.
they take out the flamethrowers and start burning at one of them, which I am like 50% sure was supposed to be a reference to John Carpenter's The Thing.
Could have been. Very well could have been. So, okay, so Tokusatsu and J-horror are two genres. One is about heavy use of practical effects or is made in the same mindset as what Tsuburaya really started with his craft. J-horror is movies filmed as a horror film with horror elements. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me.
Yeah, that sounds about correct to me.
I don't know, because J horror has this very specific thing that separates itself from other horror movies. Again, Alien or The Thing, they have a very different feel than things like, Ring or, The Grudge.
Call or
yeah, there's like a very different, unique style to those films that are very different from American horror movies, where I don't quite know how to put it to words, but I would disagree on the whole, again, because under that definition of it just being a, horror film, then couldn't you say J horror is just regular horror then? Then why couldn't we count Freddy as J horror? Could we count The Thing as J horror? But there's a very particular style that feels like it separates itself, if you will.
I'm going to actually ask this next question that might help establish that. Now, one argument a lot of people have is, oh, the Marvel films are tokusatsu. The Star Trek movies are tokusatsu. Yet, and we've established that tokusatsu's genre. J-horror is also a genre. We've established that. Mm-hmm. Now, J-horror means specifically Japanese horror. The J means Japanese. So, is it safe to say that all J-horror films have to be from Japan?
Not necessarily. I mean...
And why is that?
Well, it's mainly because of the fact that any studio from any country could use either the same or similar filmmaking techniques, either used for tokusatsu or J-horror films in their films. So, like, for example, an American studio could use techniques used by Tsuburaya or other J-horror filmmakers in a movie and have it be released in America. So, technically, by definition, by using those techniques, it could be classified to be in that genre, despite the fact that it was made in America.
Okay.
I mean, I could agree with that. But I feel like it has to really all go down to style. and intention.
Like
I mean, a
like
good example.
to ask the question of, can you have a tokusatsu film made outside of Japan, is kind of the same question as to whether or not like American animation and anime are in the same genre. It's
Yeah.
a hard question to ask, and technically to some degree you could say, well, you could make either argument that it is or it isn't. It really, however, I think to me it really depends on the person. There is no textbook definition of it, I would
No,
say.
I mean,
It's kind of it's or for a more accurate comparison, it's kind of like asking, it's kind of like trying to find a definition of what a dragon is. Like, you really have to look at it to really know it, I would say.
yeah, I can
So
agree there, but
You can't
I,
clearly define it. I mean, at least in some cases. Like with tokusatsu, yes, there is indeed a definition, and we've discussed that earlier. However, there are some exceptions, I would think, that would not necessarily fit all of the guidelines, but would still be considered a tokusatsu film.
mhm.
kind of like a good example I could bring up is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. A lot of the fight scenes and how they were done in those movies felt like tokusatsu. Just the way they were filmed, the way the fights were, especially the first movie, the fight between Spider-Man and Green Goblin. It really felt like a tokusatsu type of style of fight in the end. But I wouldn't define the movies under tokusatsu because it's the whole movie itself isn't exactly that Subaraya type of style. And I
Right.
feel like, again, it's better just to generalize your tokusatsu as having that Subaraya style. And I'd say maybe to be more broad, not from just being from Japan, but just being from more the East in general.
Okay. Now, I also, before Geek chimes in here, I'm also going to throw this out there. If you guys want to discuss anime versus animation, I support that because I think that also it definitely it's all the same debate. Can you consider something like Pacific Rim: The Black an anime, even though it was commissioned by a Western company with a Japanese studio? Is it anime?
And that's
Can
not
you
even getting into the
consider?
whole Avatar: The Last Airbender is an anime debate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, go for it. So I don't know if Geek wants to chime in here, but he might after that. So what do you guys think if we're going to add the anime versus animation debate in here?
Well, I mean, with anime, there's a very particular style to what people define as anime, which does avoid general confusion, because literally you could just say all animation's anime. It's just a different term. But in the end, how people generalize it, there's cartoons, there's anime. While yes, it's the same, anime is just Japanese cartoons, even though Japan is cartoons that are styled similar to ours. It's just based on perspective of things is what it mostly comes down to is perspective. And I would say that anime for me, I would generalize it as like your shonens, your different uh like Japanese animated style thing. So like Pacific Rim, the Black, that I would consider under the anime style. Even though it was commissioned by Western, it is still in the anime style.
Okay.
I think it is anime is the style of something of a particular design philosophy when it comes to things like character design, vehicle design. Like you can have stuff inspired by anime, but a lot of times some things can actually have their own style that's different from anime, if that makes sense. where it looks similar, but it's not the same. Whether it's animated in Japan, America, or elsewhere, there's things that maybe other people would consider anime I would not count, just because
So
its visual style doesn't match.
what I'm hearing is anything can be anime, but it has to fit a certain style, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I would say so.
Okay. So just like our tokusatsu and J-horror definition, they have to fit a certain style.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So stuff like Yongari, Monster from the Deep, is not from Japan, but you would consider it tokusatsu nonetheless.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, would you, if somebody said it was inspired by tokusatsu, would you have any comments on that? Would you agree or disagree?
To nail it. That would be my big argument. Because you said MCU is tokusatsu. Well, Ant-Man was inspired by Ultraman a little bit when they were making that movie and in the design. But if you watch anything of Ultraman, then you watch either Ant-Man or Ant-Man and the Wasp, the style is completely different, where I would not count them as tokusatsu
Yeah.
at all.
So, for me at least, I'm going to kind of summarize all three all in one. So, I think to be tokusatsu, or to be anime, or to be J-horror, it has to be from Japan, or to be considered that. As an example of why I think that, Italian horror films are not typically called horror films. It's always clarified Italian horror. There's a word for it. I don't know what the word is, but there is clarification for it. And I think a lot of countries have clarifications for what they define as their genre. For science fiction, I think it's always going to be in the tokusatsu or the anime genre. They don't specifically have a. They do, but I don't think it's as popular as those two when it comes to a science fiction film. However, then there is the question of, well, what about Young Gary, or something that is Japanese but is foreign, like Super Inframan, Mighty Peking Man, Yongari, The Revenge of Dr. X. And in those cases, I think it is a little harder to define because all of those have Japanese products. Revenge of Dr. X had a plant monster built by Toei. Mighty Peking Man had a Japanese suit designer. Super Inframan was inspired by Kamen Rider and Ultraman, and it features work by Toei studio hands. Yoguri was made by Toei, and it was shipped to South Korea. And Bulgasari, of course, had some Japanese stagehands working on the film. I wouldn't classify those, however, as tokusatsu by my definition, because the work was made in a foreign country. It's that country's science fiction, not tokusatsu, not J-horror. So I wouldn't establish, or I wouldn't say, like, I don't think Pacific Rim is tokusatsu, even though it was made with tokusatsu in mind. I don't think it passes the mark because it is not inherently Japanese.
It doesn't feel like
Um,
tokusatsu.
I was going to say it feels very tokusatsu inspired, but its storytelling is very, Americanized, if you will. Or sort of, the way how it tells its story, the way how the characters act, it doesn't feel tokusatsu enough, if that makes sense. where I wouldn't count it myself.
Pacific
Very
Rim
close,
to
though.
me is a unique case because to me, now I love Pacific Rim, but I am willing to admit that it is not necessarily a tokusatsu film, and I can understand that. But what I think of Pacific Rim was, I don't think Pacific Rim specifically was supposed to be a tokusatsu film. It has those vibes, yes, but it is not a tokusatsu film. What Pacific Rim was trying to be was that I think it was trying to almost be like, it was to be an homage to tokusatsu genre in general, yes. But it was also adding elements from American storytelling, which I think was the real purpose behind it, combining Asian and American storytelling into one film.
So I think we've pretty well discussed Tokusatsu. I think unless anybody wants to add in anything else, I think we are at a standstill with classifying what we think the genres, the big genres are that we will be primarily discussing throughout the rest of the recording. Does anybody else have something they'd like to add?
I think
I don't know if
I think we're good.
I was going to want to say your definition of tokusatsu having to be made in Japan or had, you know, Japan somehow involved in its development. Even if I wouldn't agree with it, I do think it's a very, very fair way if you wanted to do it, where I don't think I would completely disagree with it or see.
Now, why is that?
Mostly because I've heard a lot of people argue that with anime, and I think it's pretty kind of fair. If you wanted to consider anime as just animation and it has to be made in Japan, you know, that is, again, technically what I think a lot of people kind of go by. So if you took that same sort of definition yourself and used it for tokusatsu, I would say that's pretty fair, even if, again, to me at least, I would like make, again, just by the feeling of it, special cases, even if they don't follow the rule, if you will, of it being made in Japan or by Japan. I personally say if you can fool me into thinking it is Japanese, even if the Japanese had nothing to do with it, I would count it.
Also, yes, by my definition, the MonsterVerse is not tokusatsu.
No, it's not.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, actually,
Sorry.
let me ask you guys this: Monster Hunter. The games originate in Japan. The movie was made by Sony, a company that is very well established in Japan, and Toho co-produced it. And we all know who Toho is.
Mm-hmm.
It was made by an American team, but everything backing it essentially was based in Japan. Would you consider Monster Hunter, the live action movie, tokusatsu?
I
I'm
would
gonna say
not.
no. No.
No?
I would put it in whatever genre we got right now, where D-War kind of fits into, or whatever those recent Chinese movies that have been made with a lot of like fantastical elements, like dudes surfing on giant snakes while like shooting like full auto arrows or whatever. I have no idea what genre that is. I don't have a name for it. I would not say it crosses under tokusatsu, but there's definitely some sort of genre there. I don't know what it is, but there's something about those films that feel very different from everything else. That kind of feel like it's doing its own thing. And I would more label Monster Hunter under whatever that genre is.
Well,
Monster Hunter to me is just a fantasy action adventure.
It's fair. Actually, something that I just thought of. So, and I guess this can kind of sort of lead into the next topic of discussion. King Kong would be considered a kaiju, correct?
We will get into that very, very soon.
So, but
Yeah.
let's go to one side of the argument and say that King Kong is a kaiju. By that definition, would the rest of so this leads to the possibility that King Kong could be a tokusatsu film. Now, I'm not saying that it is one or it is not. Could that open up the possibility that other Ray Harryhausen films or Willis O'Brien films could be considered tokusatsu?
If King Kong, like the 33 film, is considered tokusatsu, then yes, the other Harryhausen films are tokusatsu.
I would say they get close, but they're not the same. Because again, the tokusatsu style of storytelling is not there. That's
No.
what's missing is the way how the story is portrayed, how the writing style is, and what the inspirations are. And they feel more like they're inspired by, again, sort of more, I guess hopefully the correct word would be sort of a Eastern or whatever style of writing and storytelling.
Western?
Mm-hmm.
Western, maybe.
If you're referring to,
I'm
if
trying
you're
to.
referring to Asian,
I'm not Asian.
locations,
It's
it'd be
American. Okay, so Western.
Western.
In Western.
Western.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
misspeaking. My brain. I had a brain fart there, trying to figure out. I can't tell my
Okay.
directions. I'm an old man. But no. Basically, it felt very westernized in their way of storytelling versus that Eastern philosophy of storytelling. Now, their effects do get kind of close, but I wouldn't call them tokusatsu. Also, claymation, they don't, like, what's the word, hit the same as a suit, if that makes sense.
But Tsuburaya even used stop motion animation in his films.
That is true. He did use
Like
stop motion.
King Kong versus Godzilla, they used a bit of stop motion for those films. In fact, there's even like one shot in particular where they used puppets.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Puppetry, stop motion, but what's the main thing that is mostly in the film? Guys in suits. Suitmation. Is there a lot of suitmation in Harryhausen's film?
Well, actually, so if we're considering King Kong tokusatsu, wouldn't that mean the 76 film and the 86 film are? Because they use suitmation?
They use suitmation, and again, they get close, but I wouldn't call them tokusatsu just because of the storytelling element. It's very similar to anime. There's a particular way that Japanese have their stories written, if that makes sense. Even when they're Western inspired, there's still just, I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about how they make their stories that feels completely different than how we write ours.
Okay.
And you need to have that writing in order for it to count.
I see.
I think I agree, that writing, but also with like different type of effects they use, like building miniatures, suits, etc. And having that Tsuburaya style. That's the tokusatsu. I would definitely would have
Also,
considered
the pyrotechnics.
Yep, pyrotechnics.
I would also say usage of score as well. A lot of films will use their score, and some use it better than others. But Tokusatsu has a certain way with how they use their music, if you will, in their shots that you don't. That is very.
Doesn't.
Again, it's the perfect mix of everything that makes it feel that way. If that makes sense. Again, you have to almost see it. You see something and it doesn't feel right, it's probably not tokusatsu. But if you see something and it all matches up, the patterns all match, you know it when you see it.
Okay. I feel like I'm the odd man out because I'm like, if you are not from Japan, if you break the borders of Japan, you are not Tokusatsu or J-horror anime.
Oh, and that's
Well,
absolutely a valid opinion to have.
That
Isn't
is valid. I can
I
agree
also
with
think
that.
you have the. I also think you have probably the majority, and you just happen to get in your roundtable a bunch of weirdos that just sort of have their special cases in mind.
A bunch
So
of
that's
un,
also
a bunch
probably
of
it. We could,
like
so I'm unlucky.
It's-
I picked
Yep.
maybe I picked the wrong people.
ET's the only one
uh,
that ET's the only one with a wrinkled brain, while the rest of us are smooth brains.
yeah, that probably sounds about right. His brain you could surf on, and ours is like a nice, calm, relaxing summer sail.
So, Geek, somebody knows anime terms, you might be able to help me here. Is it an
Uh-huh.
otaku that's like very like set on like it has to be Japanese? Is that right?
Depends on otaku, because otaku means different things in Japan versus American otaku. But I would say if you were to ask your average otaku over here, they would agree with you on if it's not from Japan, it's not anime. Because most otakus I've
Okay.
met that identify as otakus, they do not like Ruby, they do not like Avatar, and they're like, those are American, they are not anime. Get that trash out of here.
Wait, Ruby is not Japanese?
No,
No,
that's my
it's not.
Rooster Teeth.
Mm-mm.
That's by
Then I just
American company.
my whole perception of one of my coworkers has changed. They are not they don't like anime.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I just said. I would because again, see, you didn't know that. If you looked into it and didn't know who made it, you would be fooled into thinking it's anime. It's the same thing with Avatar. That's how I kind of would define this. Is if you don't know who made it and you're like, "Yep, this feels like this fits into this genre to me," and then you find out afterwards it wasn't the Japanese who made it, that's when I would go like, "Good job, you nailed it. I count."
Well, actually, about the not looking into it argument, there actually is a small flaw with that. Like, it doesn't matter like whether or not you're watching Avatar on a physical disc or you're watching it on Netflix. You'll always see the Nickelodeon logo come up. So, I mean, if you
Well,
watch it
what
just like,
happens if you watched it without knowing Nickelodeon had anything? Even if you like didn't know, like you know what I mean, if that makes sense.
Like
Whether
come
you know
across
or
it while
not,
browsing a
if
I
you
mean,
channel.
well,
look
yeah,
out,
if you had like every
yeah,
episode somehow without the Nickelodeon intro on it, then yes, you could be fooled into thinking that it's an anime. But I'm just saying, in most circumstances, the common person would not likely fall for the idea that Avatar is an anime.
well,
I'm not
let's
saying it
bring
is
in.
impossible, just unlikely.
But what about let's say Afro Samurai as well? Because Afro Samurai has all of those American logos before it starts as well.
Something I want to bring up is otaku. Otaku, the actual definition is a young person who is obsessed with computers or particular aspects of popular culture to the detriment of their social skills.
Yep.
That
Again,
Well, if that's
that
the
is
case,
not
then the world population has a lot more otakus than we initially thought.
again, that's the Japanese definition. There's a pop culture definition to things, and then there's the actual definition of things. Like ET said.
that's not
Again,
the
we talked about
that's
earlier.
not the Japanese definition. That is the Japanese. That's the only definition by the dictionary. Like that is the only
But
definition.
if you
I
go,
I've heard it used in a context of somebody who's like old fashioned with their anime or something like that.
those
Mhm.
are old takus. Those are different.
Old takus. Okay.
What?
Otakus is a play on words to otaku, and they're people who are usually very into older anime, usually 90s or 80s. And they're only into that, and they're not into any newer anime or anything past 2000 usually. They're called old takus.
So why don't we switch gears here, and let's go back to what William initially brought up, which was kaiju. That is,
Yep.
I think, going to be the big discussion. I didn't realize it would take us an hour to talk about Tokusatsu J-horror anime. I was expecting everybody to say like their piece and be over in like 10, 15 minutes, but looks like I don't have to pad the runtime.
You got the
So-
weird people.
Yeah, I
Well-
got the weird people that
on
disagree
the
with
plus side, we
me.
got a deluxe edition of a episode of Kaiju Conversation.
Well, to be fair, I'm pretty sure every episode I expect to be over in like an hour, and it always like we record and it's like 2.5 hours in and we finish. So I'm a train wreck when it comes to figuring out how long we're gonna be.
It's past an hour. Geek is. I'm trying my hardest to behave, but I may start misbehaving, and I apologize in advance.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
it's
God.
okay. Rex will have a whale of a time editing.
Well, I say as
Um,
long as we keep the conversation concise and we don't go into many too outlandish areas, I say we could probably get this under 2 hours, maybe.
I fully support outlandish ideas. They made me rich. Okay.
Right.
So, the next topic will be it's a big thing, but we're going to try and break it up in each individual. So, kaiju. What is a kaiju? And then we're going to establish I'm going to base this off the Wikipedia page. Kaiju has subcategories. You've got Daikaiju, you've got Kaijin, you've got Seijin, and in Seijin you have Henshin. So we're going to establish each of these definitions as we go. So we're going to start with Kaiju, then Daikaiju, then Kaijin, and then Seijin, and we're going to establish what the difference between a Seijin and a Henshin is. So, first of all, what is a Kaiju? We're going to start with Juan, and then we're going to do Geek, and then on William. And so, we'll go ahead and get started there.
All right. So the most basic way I could put a kaiju. A kaiju is anything, as I see, any monster or any beast that is from specifically Japan, I would say is a kaiju. Like, that is the best way to define it. That is the way to not cause confusion. Easy and simple to the point. That is how I would define a kaiju.
Geek?
Kaiju. I would say, kind of, again, there's three things a kaiju would have to be in order for it to count for me. Number one, it has to be living. It can't be like, like it has to be like a living creature. It can't be something mechanical or anything.
Because that's a mech.
That would be a mech, a robot, or, something else. Two, it has to be a sort of above a person's normal size. This could be anything from maybe 8 feet tall to, 100 meters tall, if you will. There's no maximum size that a kaiju can be, but it has to be a little bit of on the bigger side. If it's like a little bit smaller, or it's something that's like, the size of your kneecap or whatever, I wouldn't really call that a kaiju. And then finally, similar to what I was saying before with anime and tokusatsu, in its design, it has to be definitely in that Japanese inspired of how they designed their monsters. Because American monsters have a very different philosophy behind how we design ours versus how the Japanese design theirs. And that's how I would count a kaiju versus not kaiju.
Okay. And then William?
I would say the definition of a kaiju is a inhuman creature. Not necessarily like inhumanoid, but because there are some kaiju that are humanoid in shape that are considered to be kaiju. But any inhumanoid creature that is from Japan, that, of course, is larger than a human, obviously that too, that to some degree has abnormal abilities. So, for example, being able to breathe radioactive fire out of their mouths, or maybe having something very unnatural about their design, like having 3 heads.
Okay.
Can I add something onto this real quick? I was just thinking about it. For kaiju, another way I'd define it, if it uses something similar, even if it's a CGI kaiju, but it uses something similar to that of Tokusatsu-like effects, or using Tokusatsu, like say a suit, or its design is based off of a suit-like element. I think that's also a good way to define the kaiju as well.
Okay,
I have
so
a
your
question for one. Would you consider the xenomorphs from Alien a kaiju?
To keep it relatively simple, no. It's not from Japan, and while it does have that type of, it is a suit, it is not a kaiju. It is American. I think it doesn't have that type of kaiju style to it either.
The closest I
but
could really say the Alien franchise coming to having a is maybe the Alien Queen in Aliens, but no.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, Juan, and then I've got some questions for everybody else. So
Okay.
you said that it has to be from Japan.
Yes.
What is different with kaiju than tokusatsu or J-horror? Like, why is kaiju specific to Japan and the others are not?
Well, the thing is, in the style, I would say that the more like I think of it, it is better just to relatively have everything. Whenever something's referenced in Japanese, it's easier just to say it's Japanese. There could be times where there's a style based off of it. It gets kind of confusing in the meld, but I would say to stick to the basis of when someone mentions a kaiju, you're mentioning a Japanese monster. When someone mentions tokusatsu, you're mentioning a Japanese-styled filming and story. And then when someone's mentioning J-horror, well, Japanese horror. I think it's just easier to strictly say the basis is from Japan than anything to avoid confusion. Because you could really get into perspective of everything, but to keep things short and simple, I believe it has to be from Japan.
Okay. And then Geek. So you said that a kaiju. Could you refresh me? Sorry.
3 things. Got to be living. It's got to be on the bigger side of things. And finally, it has to follow. When you look at how Japanese design their creatures, they have a very kind of specific philosophy in their design that's different than how we design our creatures.
Okay. So first things first, would you consider the 11-foot tall man that lived a kaiju? If it's not, since he was larger than your average human being.
Not really. That's the thing of what I would say. If there was, let's say, the 11-foot tall man was not a real person, it was instead he's supposed to be a creature in a movie, and that's his only gimmick, is he's an 11-foot tall dude, and it's the horror of what if you had somebody who's way taller than you just sort of like messing with you or whatever. I wouldn't really count that because it doesn't follow the Japanese philosophy of monster design. It's very Americanized design because Americans just like taking regular creatures we see and changing maybe a little thing, maybe here or there, but most of the time not, and just changing its size. A lot of our monsters we tend to do that.
Now, the director of Singular Point in an interview said the graboids from Tremors was his favorite kaiju. Though he did say he wasn't sure it counted, that's what he said as his favorites. What do you have to say to that?
I say he's perfectly right. I can understand his confusion because a lot of people do believe that kaiju have to be Japanese. But the graboid from Tremors is not, it doesn't really have that sort of too much of an American philosophy in its design where it's just a bigger animal. It's its own creature that's unlike, you can see its inspirations from real creatures, but it's not a real creature that could, what's the word? Maybe exist realistically. Because it's just too out there.
So why is the xenomorph not a kaiju, or do you think it is, and I'm putting words in your mouth?
I would disagree on it because a lot about its design is very realistic and practical of an actual living creature that could exist.
Wouldn't the same be said for a graboid?
Yep.
Well, that's the thing. There's not a lot of like creatures with like, when you have like a little mouth inside of your mouth, like, you know, it's part of the same sort of creature, if you will, where the alien is sort of like a parasite, which is similar to a lot of different insects, if you will. What's the word? The graboid just, again, it's sort of something you need to kind of look at and you notice it and you go, yep, that's that, or no, it's not. The graboid, again, can be designed by someone Japanese, and I'd be fooled.
I'd like
xenomorph is very French in its design.
I'd like to add something to this. When the director was stating his favorite kaiju, I would say that he just meant, because remember, kaiju in Japan just means monster or strange beast. So he's just going on how they say it in Japan. He is saying, my favorite monster is the graboid. But here's the thing, Geek. I don't think you could say that about a graboid because the thing is, a graboid, by my definition, it isn't a kaiju. But you can't just say because it looks like a certain creature that you would see. Because in a lot of our kaiju films and tokusatsu films, we have things like Kumonga, Kamacuras,
Mothra, Meebus, Gamers, Gazora.
Exactly.
Ebra,
exactly.
But do they act like the creatures they're based on? Last time I checked, you know, moths don't like cover everything in dust that can explode, or happen to run to the beck and call of two little fairies, if you will.
But Kamacuras acts like a praying mantis.
Is a very, yeah, but that's the thing about, and Kamacuras, I would kind of argue, and not really. I would definitely, even though it's Japanese. What's the word? It depends on which version of Kamacuras. Because the original Kamacuras, I would say, doesn't really feel like a kaiju to me.
But
where the one in Final Wars that can turn invisible, well, isn't that what the question is of not what things would be? What is this conversation? Are we asking about what everyone else would label as kaiju or what we label as kaijus?
What you label as kaiju.
Yeah.
I would not label original Kamacuras because it's just a giant mantis, similar to the deadly. Well, actually, wait, because it doesn't really look that much like, despite it being a mantis-like creature, mantises don't have red eyes. Its eyes are red. Same with manga, because it has like crystal eyes, which spiders do not have. Like its eyes are all wrong. Again, there's something different about it, where it's like what America would make, but it's not just a giant version of it. There's something off about it. making it
Mhm.
strange, if you will, like a strange beast and all that.
Yes, and that kind of goes back to one of my criteria when it comes to a kaiju. They have to have something strange or abnormal about them. Like, of course, with the Mothra example, she's fully capable of, well, at least both has her twin priestesses, the Shobijin, but she's also able to communicate with them. Or, for example, like many of the Ultraman monsters, like a lot of them, the abnormality. It's not just with their powers; it's also the fact that there's their designs. Like with a lot of
Yeah, again,
American,
it has.
American monsters, they usually, although not always, they are usually rooted in designs based on actual creatures. With
Yeah,
Kaiju, on the other hand, their designs, they can get pretty crazy at some times, especially if you go into the Ultra series.
yep. Again, that's why I said the third part is it's that Japanese philosophy of design. There's something very unique about how Japan does things versus everyone else that no one else can really do. And at first I wanted to say, because I wasn't thinking of Kamakuro's design, I was more thinking of how they sort of work. So I was about to say, maybe Kamakuros isn't a kaiju. But then after taking a closer look at his design, he looks praying mantis kind of inspired, but he doesn't look like just a giant praying mantis, though.
Well,
It looks
exactly.
like its own
None,
thing.
none of them are really. I mean, like most of the Godzilla monsters are based on existing animals, yes, but they have lots of traits that differentiate them from those animals.
Yeah.
Like, of course, like you got Kumonga and Kamacuras, for example, but you also got Megalon. He's based on a beetle, yet he's capable of launching bombs from his mouth, and he has drills for hands.
Like,
That's why I say it's easier just to categorize these things if it's from Japan or not. Because then you get into a really broad perspective of, okay, what makes a kaiju? But when simply put as, okay, it's a monster from Japan. I think that is the easiest way to define a kaiju.
but what if a monster, like, when you say from Japan, though, what if a film has a monster that's from Japan, and then it shows up and its design is very Americanized, and it's an American movie? If they call it a kaiju in the film, would you say, yep, that's a kaiju? Or Pacific Rim? There we go, Pacific Rim. Would you call the monsters in Pacific Rim that are called kaijus, would you say, yep, those are kaijus? Or would you say they may be called kaijus, but I don't agree, they're not kaijus?
Those are
Kaiju
not
name
kaijus.
only. Kino.
They are not kaijus. I would not call the monsters on Pacific Rim kaijus. They don't have the design to it, and also it's not from Japan.
I'm probably going to be the odd man out for this one and say that to some degree that the creatures that we see in Pacific Rim, I would to some degree classify them as kaiju. However, I do still think that the argument that they are not kaiju is valid because of the fact they do not come from Japan. However, I think with most of the designs, I would say they are so abnormal, and especially like when it comes to just not just the creatures' designs, but also like what some of them are capable of doing. I would say that I am more leaning to the idea of them actually being kaiju. However, I think objectively it is more lenient towards them not being kaiju, but I will say that it is indeed a splitting matter when it comes to Pacific Rim.
I personally would count them as actually kaiju because they feel by their, again, designs, very Japanese in philosophy of how they design their monsters. Because, yeah, there's some stuff that are based on real animals and look a little bit more hyper realistic, but there's enough of them that are kind of changed up enough or weird enough to where it doesn't just feel like we just took something that already existed and just made it bigger. Like you see with a lot of American films, like and a lot of our monster films. We like to just take something that already kind of exists and just say, yo, let's just make it bigger or make people smaller. Or what if we made this and made this? Where the kaiju from Pacific Rim feel very much like their own distinct thing, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I would more count them as a kaiju. You're not going to confuse a kaiju from Pacific Rim as an actual living creature.
Plus one thing about Pacific Rim that almost any other kaiju you can't really say has is because of the fact that it's mainly because of mainly because of the fact that the creatures from Pacific Rim were designed by the same group of people, but with like the way the skin is textured, like you would see all different kind. Like it's mostly a combination of grays, blacks, and even some greens. But like, cause like when you see like the very almost exoskeleton like texture to some of them, and like the little lines of colors of blue and green going across the bodies, the Pacific Rim kaiju, they all look similar, but they are also very distinct from any other kaiju in any other kaiju film. Like, you could look at them instantly and you would know that's a Pacific Rim kaiju.
What's your thoughts on this, E.T.?
I think most of you are wrong. So the thing about kaiju, for me at least, and we're gonna get into this when we start talking about the different classifications of a kaiju, is they can come, I think, in any size. The definition of kaiju is strange beast. Humans are animals. Humans can be strange beasts. The giant teacher from Attack of the Giant Teacher is technically a kaiju. But what is he exactly? We'll get into. I think kaiju is like tokusatsu, as it's a broad umbrella that covers a ton of different things. I don't think it covers specifically giant monsters. I don't think it covers Ultramans. I don't think it covers Mechagodzilla. I agree with Geek on that. I don't think kaiju means robots or mechs.
I agree with
That's
that.
a whole nother can of worms. But I think kaiju is different from monster because not every kaiju is a monster. Pigmon from Ultraman, I would argue, is not a monster. But he is a kaiju nonetheless.
Right, but they still call him a monster. But yes, he is a kaiju. He is a kaiju still.
Yes.
And that's why
Wolf Guy. Wolf Guy is a kaiju because he's a strange beast, but he's not a giant monster. He's a werewolf.
Exactly. As I said, kaiju to me is just from Japan. A strange
I would agree
beast
with that.
or monster from Japan. It doesn't even have to be monstrous. It doesn't even have to be a monster. But if it's some strange beast or being from Japan that was made in Japan, that's a kaiju.
I think it has to be. Now, he does have a good argument. What do you consider the kaiju from Pacific Rim? And with that, I answer they're kaiju in name only. They are kaiju because in the film they are called kaiju, and it's like saying 98 is not Godzilla. It is Godzilla. It sucks to suck. It's Godzilla. It's kaiju. That being said, however, they are not what kaiju to me are. Kaiju are Japanese creatures
Exactly.
that are different from your typical everyday creatures. A human is not a kaiju, but a wolfman from Japan is a kaiju.
But a wolfman from America isn't a kaiju.
Correct. It is a monster. I'm waiting on Geek to tell me I'm wrong.
Most of the stuff I believe we're talking about here is mostly, again, it's mostly just sort of subjective. We're not talking objectively.
You'll find a reason. You'll find something to say I'm wrong.
Now, I can't say
No,
now from
I'm trying my best. Sorry, go on.
the Japanese. Now, when you ask them what's a kaiju, Japanese, they're just going to think a monster. They're not going to think of it how we're thinking of it. To be absolutely truthful with you, because kaiju to them just means strange beast, or how they would say monster. They wouldn't try to differentiate it, because I don't think they really, for the most part, care too much into those type of things.
Now, actually, Juan, let me ask you a question. Is Legendary Godzilla a kaiju?
I will say Legendary Godzilla is it may be Godzilla, but it's not a kaiju. It doesn't have the kaiju design to me. It doesn't have.
What about Dora or Mothra?
Not a kaiju. They're westernized. They are from the West. They are made in America. It's not a kaiju.
Now, King Kong. And I think this is where everybody will jump in. But we'll see. King Kong. Kaiju, no kaiju.
No kaiju.
King
kaiju.
Kong.
I think it's only a
King
kaiju,
Kong...
but the King Kong from Toho is a kaiju. But the King Kong out of Toho is not a kaiju.
And then everybody else, what's your take? Kong, kaiju, no kaiju?
Depending on the Kong, I would say.
Then go ahead, establish what Kongs are kaiju and what Kongs are not.
I would call the Kong from 33 because it's sort of its own thing, and it's not. And even though it's heavily inspired by a gorilla, he doesn't really look that much like a gorilla, and he doesn't act that much like a gorilla. So I would consider him technically a kaiju and not just a giant gorilla. 76, I believe. That one just feels like he is just a big gorilla. So I would not consider him a kaiju. Toho Kong, we consider him a kaiju. Peter Jackson's King Kong, he has a bit more personality to him and a lot of other things that would distinct him where he gets close. But due to the fact that, again, he looks very much just like a giant gorilla with just some scars on his face, and even though they gave him more humanistic characteristics, he's not weird enough or different enough to really feel like he counts, though he does get close. And then we got Monster vs. Kong, which is totally 100% a kaiju. Because its design, again, is very much like 33's. It feels inspired by a gorilla, but they change a lot of his characteristics. They added a lot more ape species to his body to where he feels like he counts as both a kaiju and, like one said, an Americanized or westernized style. He's kind of like, again, the Pacific Rim kaiju, a sort of mix between the two philosophies into one, to where I think it's fair to call him either or.
Or, I like the classification that Legendary did do, the more I think about it, is Titan.
Muto?
By calling them Titans.
Oh.
Well, Titans to me are to me they have to be from Greek mythology and just look like big mountains of people. That's what I think of when I think of a Titan. When you're trying to call some giant monster a Titan,
is
it doesn't feel
taken
right.
from Greek mythology. But the reason why they were called Titans is because of the fact that they were the original gods. And that at some point, well, quite literally, they went under the earth and went into a sort of stasis, I guess you could say. Now,
yes,
what reason they did go into hiding in the first place, we'll probably never know. But it's made, the reason why they were called Titans is to sort of give them a similar backstory to the actual Titans in Greek mythology, which at this point is pretty much confirmed as of GBK. And I will say, calling them Titans probably was the smarter option, as the Tokusatsu and fandom already had like a huge debate on whether or not the Pacific Rim creatures were kaiju or not. So I think Legendary didn't want to make the same mistake with GBK and the Monsterverse. So they just ended up calling them Titans.
Okay.
Now I have one final question. If this podcast became strictly Monsterverse, should it be changed to Titan Conversation, not Kaiju Conversation?
At that point, we would change it to Titan Truth Podcast.
Okay, I'll admit, that would be pretty clever.
So, in the wiki, it classifies that you also have Daikaiju, Kaijin, and Seijin. There's also yokai. So I'm gonna have each of you just brush through what you think. We'll have general discourse and we'll go ahead and wrap things up.
Okay.
So Juan, do you want to get us started?
All right. So Daikaiju. Daikaiju simply means greater strange beast. To me, that means giant. A Daikaiju is usually a giant beast, a giant monster. Things like Godzilla, things like the Ultraman Kaiju, like any giant monster of Japan is a Daikaiju. That's what that's what I would say a Daikaiju is. That's how I define it. Yokai I think are more, because you could have Daikaiju that become part of yokai, because yokai are these fairy tale like beasts from Japanese tales, from Japanese fairy tales. I think they associate more as yokai for their kind of mythical aspect, and for what they're based on, it would be a yokai. Things like
More spiritual, like Kappas or
Yep.
Daimajin.
Yeah, exactly. That would be more yokai-esque, or stuff, even, or Orochi. Orochi would be a yokai.
Okay.
So yes, that's how I define yokai. And then the others I'm not too familiar with, unfortunately, except Kaijin, which I guess is more humanoid from what I've heard. I'm not quite sure. But if we're going by there, I'd say it's just a more average humanoid, very, very humanoid-like kaiju would be a kaijin. But then you have others like War of the Gargantuans. You got Giras or the Frankenstein. Those could be considered daikaiju because they're giant, even though they still.
So do you think there's some crossing over there? Like they're a Daikaijin in a way.
Yeah, I would say there's crossing.
Okay. And then, just so you know, the definition of a Seijin is a star human, star man.
Okay, so that's like Ultraman.
Alien, usually.
Yeah. Okay, so
humanoid aliens.
Okay, so that's like Ultraman, your Zillions, stuff like that. So
yes.
Okay, yeah, and it's from Japan. All of these, I will strictly say, are Japanese bases. They're from Japan only, because that is the best way to keep everything just orderly and not as confusing. Because then when you start getting broader perspectives and go into literal terms, it gets more confusing.
Okay. And then geek.
I would mostly kind of agree with one, except depending on who you would say would be, like Kaijin would be to me a strange person. That's what I would label the 50-foot teacher, I believe, or Attack of the Giant Teacher. I mean, Attack of the Giant Teacher.
Mhm.
Sorry, but basically that's what I would label that movie as, is a Kaijin, if you will. The Giant Teacher would be a Kaijin to me because they're a
So
person
Daikaiju.
who just Daikaijin. Dai I would use if, like he said, it's just a bigger version. So to me, again, kaiju would help with size, but technically my definition of kaiju would more better fit with probably Daikaiju if you were being more broad or being more objective. But to me, Daikaiju and kaiju is what I think of when I think of the word kaiju.
So
Or
by that,
Daikaiju is mostly what I think of.
So by that definition, is the 50-foot woman a Daikaijin?
No, that'd be a kaijin, yes. By that sort of term. But again, that's more the, because it's kaijin to me is different than kaiju. Because kaijin is also less weird, where it's just a bigger sort of thing of something else. Or mostly person, if you will.
Yes, it's humanoid.
Yeah, it has to be humanoid. Like, for example, the deadly mantis, that's just a giant praying mantis, or tarantula, which is just a giant spider, or Attack of the Giant Gila monster. They would not be, I would consider kaiju, but they would also not be kaijin. They would just be monsters. Then you got Star Person, which I forget what that Japanese. Seijin? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, Seijin would be something like, again, they would be aliens. These would be basically things that would not really count under the kaiju sort of thing because it's not weird enough, or there's like an intelligence kind of to it, and again, it's very alien and unknown, if you will. For example, again, when I was arguing that I would not count aliens as kaiju, but I would count aliens as Seijins, due to the fact they have a hive mind, and Predator. Predator is probably closer to Seijin, where xenomorphs would be more like, depending on who you ask, they could be either or someone says, nope, because they're not Japanese, they're French in design. But to me, they would more go under Seijin than Kaiju, due to their alien nature, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And then William? Oh, wait. You had yokai. You still have yokai geek.
Yeah, yokai would be, to me, anything based off Japanese mythology. And that is stuff that's like their sort of history. Like, Oni would be yokai to me.
Okay.
So, Japanese mythology inspired.
Would Daimajin count as yokai to you?
I don't know that much, but he does seem like something that would fit within what I've seen of Japanese mythology, so yes.
Okay.
What about something like Ghidorah from GMK? Because he's based off Orochi. Because it said he's Orochi.
Well, I would not really...
And they are spirits.
Mm-hmm.
True. But just because you're inspired, again, everything kind of has to have that feel.
It's not inspired. It's stated that he is Orochi. He used to have 8 heads.
He's growing them back.
Well, he's not... Well, he didn't used to have 8 heads. He is a baby Orochi. That is what it said.
Okay. Either
Wait, is this... Wait, which one is this then? Is this Monsterverse
GMK.
or...
GMK.
GMK.
Okay. GMK. Actually, with that design, I would... No, I'm checking. I just got confused because I thought you guys said Monsterverse. I'm like, what? No, he's from space. But no, I would count him.
You'd count him?
Yeah, I would count him as kind of
Okay.
both, because he's also still a big, strange
Kaiju.
beast, if you will.
Yeah.
I would
Daikaiju.
count him as kind of both, though.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yokai Daikaiju is probably what I would call him.
Yokai Daikaiju. That's a mouthful.
It is, but, that's kind of, if you had to label him as something, is what I would label him.
I see. And then William.
I would actually have to agree with almost everything when it comes to Daikaiju and such. But the only one I could really disagree with is the definition of yokai.
Okay.
Now, would that be
Yokai,
my definition or one's definition?
both your definitions actually.
Okay.
Yokai, I mean, there are a few elements about them that I will agree. Like, of course, they have to come from based on Japanese mythology. That I will agree
Mhm.
on. However, I think where it starts to deviate is the size factor. I think to some degree there would be some kind of size limit when it comes to yokai. Outside of certain yokai, they are generally either around the size of humans, smaller, or only slightly bigger.
Okay.
Like, probably not exceeding maybe 30 feet, I would say.
Okay. So if it exceeds 30 feet, it's a kaiju. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Or a
However,
daikaiju? Yeah.
yes. But if it is smaller than that, and then I would consider it a yokai.
Okay.
Hmm.
I see. Well, I had a question. Oh, so I got a question for everybody. So the general consensus is a or I guess not so much for Juan, but for William and Geek. The consensus is a kaiju has to be larger than a human, right?
Yes.
What if it's let's say there was a mutant dog, but it wasn't a dog. It was like a weird alien or something like that. It was larger than your typical dog, so it's larger than what it's most closest to. Or like it was like Lizzie from Rampage, but smaller, but still larger than an average crocodile, but not an actual crocodile or alligator. Would those be kaiju because they're large, or daikaiju because they're larger than what the real life counterpart is? Or is it solely based off of a human? Are you people narcissists?
Well, that depends. How large is it?
Larger than said animal. If let's say it's a Saint Bernard is the largest a dog can be. If
Like,
it's larger than a Saint Bernard, but not larger than a human, like Clifford, the big red dog, when he was a small wee lad, but not. I think you get what I mean.
I guess you could consider it a kaiju, but in order for to be a daikaiju, it would probably have to be roughly around the size of a building.
So a building is what what you think a daikaiju is.
Or around the size, or maybe even bigger than a building. Yes, that's what I would define kaiju to be. At least when it comes to its
And
size, anyway.
what size of like the average height, or like what? How big is this building that we're establishing here?
I guess your typical skyscraper or office building.
Now, if
I'd
that's
like
the case, oh, go ahead.
I'd like to say for me, a Daikaiju is anything bigger than your average standard home.
Okay.
Just like your average standard home, like something that I think really for me,
So 2 main floors and a basement.
yeah.
Is that really standard though? Because there's some people who their standard home is like an
Okay.
apartment room, or
Okay,
you got
Yeah,
trailer.
yeah.
right. Okay, how about I say this? Anything I think Daikaiju is anything. I think the smallest Daikaijus I've seen are around 20 meters. I think 20 meters and above is a good way to estimate a Daikaiju.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if we're going off a skyscraper, then 54 doesn't count because 54 is very much smaller.
So here's an
is
interesting question for us. How do we feel about the Titans on Attack on Titan? What's our level on those?
those are larger than buildings.
Some
Well,
of them
their
are, but
heads are-
Titans come in many different sizes. You've
Well,
got
depending
ones
on
that
the
are
Titan,
barely the
it's
size of a person.
Well, with those Titans, like some of them have like their shoulders are going over the wall, and some like their heads are just barely peeking over it. So, and like, yeah, I'd roughly say they're Daikaiju.
Or Daikaijin.
What about Kamada-kun? What about Kamada-kun?
Kamada-kun is a Daikaiju.
But he's only, I think, 16 meters tall.
Hmm.
Or maybe I should say not just like how tall, but also in like length, or like Kamada. Let's see, Kamada-kun.
So they have to be massive.
They have to be massive, is the point. Yeah, they got to be.
Yeah. They have to be big.
Okay. And then Geek, what was your size limit for what a
I would,
for when
like
a
I
kaiju
said,
becomes
now
high?
like I said, technically my actual size limit would more kind of be like what I would count a Daikaiju. But because I mostly enjoy Daikaiju and that's what I usually base my kaiju off of, most of the stuff of what I would consider a kaiju is more what I would think of a Daikaiju. Because to me, Daikaiju and kaiju are sort of almost one and the same, even though they're typically different in the actual broader terms, if you will.
I see.
He's
So
14
again, to
meters.
me, it has to be bigger than 12 feet, which I believe
12
is. Yeah, I believe. How much is a meter to a foot?
I think about 3
I thought it
feet
was like
per
7
meter.
feet per meter. Or actually, yeah, it's 3 feet. 3 feet per meter.
3 feet per meter.
I thought that was a
So
yard.
4
Honestly,
meters.
I'd say that, as I said before, anything around 20 meters and over. I mean, Kamada-kun kind of falls under that. He's 14 meters. He's just a bit behind from 20.
Okay.
So, I'd say maybe 10 meters. We could lower the bar to 10 meters and over.
How big is the Destroyas in Godzilla versus Destroya when they're messing with humans in their vents and stuff?
Like 8 feet tall.
Yeah, like 8 to 10 feet,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah,
That's a
because
kaiju. That's not a Daikaiju.
yeah, that's
That's
what
a
I would
kaiju.
consider.
Those are
Yeah,
kaiju.
that would be kind of my limit of calling that a kaiju, but its smaller form that feeds on fish, I would not call a kaiju.
Yeah.
Actually, would you call Destroya's microscopic form a yokai?
No.
No, it's still a kaiju. I'd say that
it's a
Destroya is a
kaiju.
kaiju regardless.
I'm not saying
but
that. I'm not saying
he's
that I
not a
think it is.
Daikaiju
I'm just
until his later forms.
putting the idea out there. I'm not saying I actually think that.
Destroya has no spiritual connection, so I don't consider him yokai.
Okay. So yeah,
No.
He has no mythological spiritual connection.
Right, so
Yeah, I would not
Destroya
consider him yokai.
So Destroya would not necessarily be so Destroya is a kaiju up to
Daikaiju.
Yeah.
He starts as a kaiju, he ends as a Daikaiju.
So
Exactly.
At which form do you think would he start becoming a Daikaiju then?
After the human-sized one.
After the human-sized
So-
one, and he
Daikaiju.
starts to get to the size of Junior, he's Daikaiju.
So his aggregate form then.
Yes.
All right.
So I'll bust through my definitions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So Daikaiju, larger than, I say, 20 feet. If it's, or like if it's at least 1.5 times the size of whatever its quote unquote real life counterpart is. 1.5 times that size. A kaijin is any humanoid thing that is not human, or like a gorilla. If it's not real life, and it's different, it is a kaijin. A seijin is any humanoid. So by the definition of kaijin, that falls over to seijin, but it has to be from outer space. Yokai is anything mythological or spiritual. And then henshin, we didn't talk about that, but henshin is anything that transforms. That's what henshin means, is transform.
Okay.
Does anybody have any last remarks they'd like to say, referring to the discussion?
No, I'd say that it's perfectly clear. And as I said, 10 meters is, which is, I think, about.
No comments here.
Yeah, I don't have much to say.
I would just say, I know I am wrong, but it was all just sort of my sort of subjective opinion on the entire thing. If I really wanted to get to the objectiveness versus the subjective of what these words mean to me, that would be a completely different conversation. So just want to make sure that's out there. This was supposed to be a subjective piece. This is not me saying if you disagree with me, you are wrong. You're probably correct.
And one thing I want to say is there is apparently some books out there in Japan that have clearly clarified and established what tokusatsu is, what a kaiju is, what a daikaiju. There's apparently books out there that have clarified that. I haven't read them. I don't know anybody who has. I heard about them very recently. We are not the experts, and we are just fans being fans. That is why this podcast will cover Ring, and we will say it's tokusatsu. That's why we'll cover Onibaba and say it's tokusatsu. Mainly because I got a list from a friend, and they put it on there, and you know what? I'm not going to argue. It's more Japanese content. Watch it, even if it isn't actually tokusatsu. Thanks to everybody who hopped in here. I appreciate it greatly. It was a fun conversation. We've been talking now for almost 2 hours. Almost 2, not exactly 2. Before we go, however, if you guys want to link anything that you'd like to, go ahead and tell people where they can find you. We're going to start with Juan, then Geek, and then William. So Juan, is there any place you'd like, or anything you'd like to link, or?
No, I'm all right.
All right.
I just enjoyed the conversation.
Geek.
I will say if you want to get a hold of me, there are 2 really good ways to find me. One is YouTube at Geek Rage 1337 on YouTube, and the second way is I am a regular of the Kaiju Conversation Discord. So if you pop your head into Discord, you'll probably find me there. Usually in the BC.
And then William.
A Deviant account where I post my kaiju art. It's Maturian. I will probably have a comment under the video when it goes up on YouTube showing the proper spelling of the name, just in case you may need help. And I, too, am also on the Kaiju Conversation Discord server for any of those that wish to come and talk to me.
All right. And then we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. So I'll go ahead and link myself, and then we'll close things out here. I'm Elijah. I'm the host of this lovely podcast you've been listening to for about 2 hours. I have a YouTube at ET13 Productions. I have 2 Twitters. One is at ET13 Productions. The other is at E as in elephant, Thomas 1975. That's my more personal one. If you want to hear whatever's in my head, go for it. It's a jumbled up mess. I'll just warn you now. I do have a Instagram at ET13 Productions, and I do have a Facebook. If you want to friend it, it's the one with the face that's been blurred out. So Elijah Thomas on Facebook, if you really want to. All those ways you can contact me, as well as on Discord through the Kaiju Conversation server. As for the podcast, please don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. Recently, we have been review bombed, and so if you wouldn't mind giving us a 5-star rating, get that average score up so more people can check us out, that would be awesome. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I don't, you can tweet us and follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have either of those, you can like us on Facebook and leave us a review there, or follow us on Instagram and contact us through that way. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, I don't blame you. Little jealous of you. You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word. You know the drill. We'll read your 5-star reviews on air for everybody to hear, as we greatly appreciate them. We also have merchandise on Teespring. It's just our logo. If you're interested, it's a thing. Eventually we'll get other artwork on there, I promise. Or if you'd like to chat with me or others, like these lovely gentlemen in our Discord server one-on-one, or just in general in a voice chat or through text, you can join our Discord server. We have every month we have a bonus episode, one for YouTube, one for our regular cast, where you can join in and be a part of the conversation, the Kaiju Conversation. And as I just mentioned, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we do upload exclusive content. We have an interview with ProjectGodzilla designer Jared Krzyzewski. I probably butchered that last name. I apologize. And we do have a upcoming series called Toku Fandom Tales that I do every other month, where I interview one person from our Discord server for about 10 minutes to get you introduced to people just like you. A huge thanks to Rex for editing these podcasts. It's a lot of work, and he doesn't get paid for it. I swear I offered him money. Don't take that the wrong way. A huge thanks to him for editing these. His stuff can be found down below. And a huge thanks to these fine gentlemen, Juan, Geek, and William, for hopping on this podcast and talking about what they classify a kaiju, daikaiju, seijin, kaijin, henshin, and yokai, along with J-horror and tokusatsu, and interesting anime conversation. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, more than happy to come on.
Yeah, it was great.
And with that, thank you guys so much for listening and being a part of this awesome podcast we've got. And please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
Sayonara.
Yeah.
Ciao.